Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the latest Buyer's Remorse webinar that we are running here at Lace Partners today. My name is Chris Howard. I am the Marketing Director at Lace Partners, and as I can see in our fabulous participants box that we've got people already entering the webinar today. So what we're going to do is I'm going to do some filler for the next minute or two as people start to join, because there's nothing worse than you join a webinar and people feel like they're halfway through. So what you're going to get from me for the next sort of 30 seconds before I start to introduce our guests is a little bit of a filler. And as I'm doing this filler, I would also like some audience participation for those people that have joined the webinar. If you've only just joined the webinar, my name is Chris Howard. I'm the Marketing Director at Lace Partners, and it's lovely to have you. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, what I would like is for everybody, if you can, to use the chat functionality or the Q&A question functionality. So obviously this is a Zoom call. I'm sure many of you have been on Zoom calls before, but if you could tell me your favorite day of the week, and if you can pop that in the chat, and if anybody says Monday, I'll think you're absolutely mad. But I'd like people to just put in the chat so that I know that I'm not just talking to myself and my wonderful guests today. I know we have some attendees that are joining us now, but yeah, pop it in the chat, or pop a question. There's a Q&A section at the bottom as well. Right, okay, I've just been told the chat's disabled. So instead of doing that, what we're going to do is if you can pop into the Q&A section. So just say hello, ask a question, say hello. And we'll see if we've got some people. The chat functionality, the Q&A functionality, it should be at the bottom of your screen. There we go. We've got Lyle, we've got Chiara, we've got Emma, we've got Andrea. Lovely to have you guys with us. We're going to get cracking in just a minute. I should probably start to introduce some of our guests now, actually. So today's webinar, and some of our guests, you're hearing my waffle already. You already know who I am. But let's introduce Sian. We're going to come off screen in a minute so you can see their wonderful faces. But Sian, just give us a quick hello. And then what we'll do is when we come off screen in a second, that you can wave at our guests, our lovely attendees today. Sian, how you doing?
Before I introduce myself, for those of you who do listen into the Lace podcasts, this is the real Slim Shady. This is the real Chris Howard. This is what he looks like in reality, for those of you who do listen in regularly. He does exist. He is not AI automation. So just to introduce Chris properly. Sure. So who am I? Sian Beecham, been in HR transformation for too many years to actually name, don't even count anymore. Cut me in half. I'm like a piece of rock. I say HR transformation. It's my passion. What have I done before? Before Lace, I was working client side with clients like Barclays, HSBC, PMI. And what I was doing was really doing anything from the evaluation upfront value case sort of work, whether it be technology evaluation, operating model design, all the way through to deploying programs. Before that, I was Accenture. Before that, I was IBM. So cut me in half. I'm pretty much HR transformation through and through, and I love it.
Would you describe yourself as a HR transformation guru?
I would love to, but I'm just slightly less proud than that. And I just go, do you know what? I've got a lot of scars. I'd like to apply them.
Love it.
I know a fair bit.
Let's introduce our next guest then, Louise. Louise, who's recently joined Lace Partners. So as part of our hazing ceremony, what we do is we get them on the first public speaking opportunity they possibly can. Louise, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm good, thank you. Yeah, so week 3, as Chris alluded to, so that's great. So I haven't been in consulting before, so I come from a client-side background. So places like dunnhumby, Pentland Brands, Mulberry, Pearson, to name a few. So in that kind of 10-year period, I've done many HR transformation programs across kind of various platforms.
Yeah, it's lovely to have Louise. And it's a really good mix that we've got today, because we've got Sian, obviously, with her background in HR transformation. She's been working at Lace for a few years. We've got Louise, who's bringing kind of a Lace, but also a kind of client side, or an in-house side point of it, because as she said, she's been working on a few projects. And then to complete our quartet, to Mr. Andrew Hall. How are you doing, sir?
Good afternoon, Chris. I'm seemingly sat in the only dark room that exists in the office today, so hopefully you can see me amongst the gloom here. Andrew Hall, a bit like Sian, a mix of consulting and in-house experiences, and I love the pleasure of dealing with process and technology. So all my experience over the last 20 years have been implementing wonderful big global HR technology programs with plenty of learnings along the way that I hope we can talk about today.
Yeah, lovely. So we've got an hour today to go through. What we're going to do is probably for about 50 minutes of those that hour session will be discussion amongst ourselves. If you have any questions, pop them into the question and answer functionality. I have a roving reporter to the right of me, who is off camera because he's very shy, who will be going through some of the questions and posing them to us, and we'll try and get through to them as we go. So some of them may be linked to some of the conversations that we have, but then some of them, obviously, if you've got any specific questions you want to ask our audience, then you can go for that today. So we've got a couple of prompt questions that we've put up to really kind of stimulate some engagement. So what I'm going to do is quickly draw up the first set, and then I'm going to crack in, and we'll get cracking with Sian as well. So some of the questions we're going to answer today, again, like I said, you can put your questions into the chat throughout the show, so please feel free to do so. But we're going to kick off with question number one, which is it technology itself that's to blame for the feeling of buyer's remorse? Now, if you have joined us for previous webinars, we've gone through a whole variety of different challenges that people are facing when they feel like they've got themselves a new piece of HR technology and it isn't quite working. And this section, obviously, today is about future-proofing. So, Sian, I want you to kick us off, helping us with the answering of question number one, and then we'll do a little around the table for the rest of the group as well. So, what do you reckon, Sian?
I can go from here, and apologies if I have to drink a lot. I do have a little bit of cold and a cough, so apologies if I do have to do a little bit of drinking as I'm going. So if we think about future-proofing our investments, and that first question, we get involved in quite a few of those situations where it's either not going so well deploying, or you've actually deployed and people are doing the, oh gosh, technology, the system integration, the implementation partner, what's gone wrong. And fundamentally, it's very rarely, never, the technology itself that's to blame. It's about getting the basics right, really. So if we step back and think about making the most of what you've either got or done, it's about getting the basics right. And I know it's going to sound really dull, so let's just think about what the dull areas are that we need to get right before we then think about some of the more exciting things that are coming downstream. So firstly, I think we need to recognise that it's a never-ending cycle actually doing stuff with technology. So you've got to think about, actually, once you've deployed, hopefully what you've done is some kind of value case. You've actually set out, what do you need to achieve? What are the outcomes you needed to achieve from putting the technology in? So we would always say, look, actually go back to your value case, look at what you set out to do, and look at whether you achieve that, whether it would be avoiding risk, whether it be avoiding cost, whether it be about employee experience, whatever those outcomes were, that's what you need to go back to think about, right, okay, have we got some of the basics right? And then there's levers that you can pull and actually then making sure that you're heading in the right direction. So that whole value case measurement and just going back and continually looking at that is very important. Then, of course, one of those pieces that you might want to then double click on, hate that term, can't believe I've just used it in public, is the adoption measurement. So what we'd be saying there is, of course, there's the sort of approach that's quite traditional. You look at the logons, the surveys, but actually what we're seeing more and more is that there's an operating model aspect to how you actually see adoption. So let's just think about what that needs to look like. The culture and the operating model that you put technology into needs to be a culture of agility and accountability. So what we're seeing work quite well, and I know, Andrew, you'll probably talk about this in a minute specifically, is having the ability to have either global product owners or global process owners, and an ability to have a feedback loop such that there is a continual feedback into those individuals who feel accountability to actually move things forward. So you would have had change champions, advocates, whilst you're actually in program mode. Those roles tend to peter off, and those roles really should be stepping in and up as you're actually deploying and you've deployed, that are those roles that have a product mentality, and they have then the ability to take input from the functions or the countries so that there's that continuous improvement aspect. And then what you find is that you're able to make decisions based on real data, and you're then enacting what it is that you're putting the technology in to do. Because fundamentally, you're putting the technology in to enable that data-driven environment. So that's the sort of things that we would be saying, that you just need to make sure you've got the basics right on. And I know we use the term ROI later, Chris, and one of the things that I had seen recently was, rather than the formal financial term ROI, was release, optimize, and innovate. And I think that is really key to everything that we need to think about. It's not just deploy and run, it's actually enabling that continuous evaluation of how things are going, and then improvement and innovation.
Yeah, it's that constantly, what is it, the painting the fourth bridge or whatever it is. It's never ending. It's the never ending story. So I was going to bring Louise in, because Louise has got an interesting perspective, because you've worked on multiple different types of projects. You've worked on multiple different systems. I think it's Oracle, you've done SuccessFactors, Ceridian. It's quite a good kind of helicopter view. So I don't know if you have anything that you just want to build on that, just from your perspective, having worked on those multiple systems.
Yeah, so I guess I thought it might be quite helpful just to run through kind of some of the problems that we've seen in reality. So just to give a bit of context, often in the roles I've been brought into was to kind of head up HR operations, both the technology deployment or advancement, but also the kind of BAU operation. And I think there might be some learnings that are helpful. So kind of when I was at dunnhumby, they had Oracle Fusion, and I think the problem there was around a kind of lack of adoption in manager self-service. Pentland Brands was another organization that I went in to do, which was SuccessFactors. And I think the problem that we had there was that the organization had just changed significantly. So what we kind of had put in 12 months ago, within that 12-month period, became very different needs. So the whole kind of data structure that underpinned that problem or organization became a problem. So, and then actually more recently kind of was at Mulberry and rolled out Dayforce. And I think that probably was the most successful deployment of all of them. And it wasn't due to the technology, because I think actually what we realized, or what I've realized, is that the problem is rarely the technology. I think that the success factor there was around probably the kind of consideration of change and the effort that went into that change story. I think it was also the kind of integration across the full technology landscape. So recognizing that whilst you might want to put one platform, often there's kind of a bit of a spider's web that needs to go on that connects various other technologies or platforms that exist. So I think what we realized was actually the problem was a kind of a lack of project capability or investment in project resource, where as I've explained, my role was BAU and tech, and by splitting that, it becomes quite difficult to make sure you're given the focus on the kind of big change activity that needs to take place. I think, as I've mentioned, the kind of consideration and application of the business change component itself, and probably that, as I say, that mentioning the kind of significant design shift. So if, with all the best will in the world, you can design something today, which if something happens overnight that you just don't see coming, you don't know is happening, then actually that global design becomes quite different. But unfortunately, the reality is that what happens is the technology gets a bad name when, as I've said, it's often not the technology that kind of causes that problem. So I think for me, the thing that is critical is about kind of, if you do come into a situation where technology has been rolled out, or you've had a big activity and actually it hasn't landed, it hasn't been adopted, as Sian mentioned, then I think the two kind of critical pieces of activity are that kind of review of the global design, review of the change activity that either has taken place or often didn't take place, and then starting at that point to then be able to kind of drive that improvement forward. And then often the result is the kind of improvement to the reputation of technology.
Yeah, and just to sort of go behind the curtain for the lovely listeners that we've got today, Andrew, myself, Sian, and Louise obviously have been talking about some of these questions prior to this. And Andrew, when we were talking previously, you talked about one of the things you mentioned, which I'd love you to just touch on, is you said, do you actually know what you've bought? And that was one of the things that I thought was quite an interesting bit. So in terms of that sort of overarching question we've been asking, is it technology to blame? And then you said, well, do you actually know the tech that you've bought? Can you just sort of give us a little bit of flavour onto that?
Yeah, of course. For me, I think there are three things that stand out. One is we get very excited in HR about new technology. There's so much out there in the marketplace at the moment, but what is it going to be used for? and who's going to use it. So we all get very excited. We're going to deploy new self-service functionality or new reporting, but it's ultimately the business that are going to be using this. And have you had that honest conversation about who's going to use it, and are they going to accept it? So that's one. The second one is around the principle around how you're going to design and implement these things. Clearly with cloud, you've got a little bit less choice about how it's done, but there are some underpinning principles around, are you going to stick to out of the box? Are you going to allow it to be customized by particular personas? You have to get that bit right at the beginning as well. And maybe the third bit before we get on to what we bought is who's going to own it? To Sian's point, who's accountable? So who's accountable once it's implemented for making sure it's working, making sure it's being adopted and driven? But the point you were raising, Chris, is I see so often both within kind of businesses that I've worked in and people I've worked with, there's such a rush to implement a piece of technology that actually you kind of forget what you signed up to in the original contract. And there are little features and things that could really help drive the adoption or the appreciation for what you've got, and that people aren't leveraging it. So one of the useful bits of advice for me is once you've implemented, always go back and make sure not only you're looking at the roadmap of what's coming, but are you actually using all the features that you've bought to start with?
Yeah, and it's really interesting. That was obviously the second question which we had, which was how do you make the most of the tech investments that you have? And that adoption piece, as Louise mentioned as well, one of the critical things that is really, really important. I just want to stick with you, Andrew, and then we'll go back into that if that's all right. Just on that question around how do you make the most of the tech? And you've obviously done quite a bit with PMI. So have you got any sort of examples of when it's worked well, that kind of good adoption rate? I know we previously talked about, if you don't mind me saying, the My PMI stuff. So if you can just touch on that, and then, yeah, just I'll bring the other guys in to give their thoughts into, what does good look like?
So for context, that My PMI is a Salesforce experience layer that we put over the top of our kind of legacy SAP to maybe hide the bit that people didn't really like engaging with. One of the things that we did early on was to build the narrative around what it was. So we didn't oversell it. We said, this isn't going to ultimately change the back end, but it's going to make it easier to find stuff. It's a very honest narrative around what it would be and what it wouldn't be. The second piece was to think about adoption from day one. So how were we going to measure how it was being utilized, not just within the business, but also within our kind of operational setup? And to have some quite honest conversations about what we were looking for in terms of utilization from day one. So we were almost setting targets of where we wanted to get to. So we weren't kind of switching the system on and going, we kind of hope and wish that people are going to use it. We kind of had a benchmark of where we wanted people to get to. And so by having that to start with, we weren't kind of waiting for people to come and use it. We were actually advocating and driving people to it from day one, because that's what we'd set as a target from an adoption perspective. So I think be clear on the narrative around it, be clear on adoption as you're designing, so that you can measure it once you've implemented.
Nice. And of course, it's probably been a good 6 or 7 minutes since Sian has spoken. So we probably need to bring Sian in on this, because she will start to get twitchy if we don't. So Sian, just if you want to build on what Andrew was talking about there, any sort of examples that you've seen in previous workings or working with clients or stuff of that good adoption?
I find that a very harsh but very fair statement, Mr.
Well, you do know. And just before you say that, just as she's preparing her answer, if you want to ask any questions, please use the question and answer functionality. I'm looking to the left here because I've got them all up on screen. So we will go through them and periodically and get through them. So if you've got any questions, please feel free to fire them into the chat, and our panel will get to answer them as much as possible. Sian, floor is yours.
So I must admit, I would be saying very similar things to Andrew and Louise have already said. So just double clicking, said it again. Look at that on some of those areas. Jeez, I hate myself. It's about capabilities and outcomes. So building on your point, Andrew, so just that clarity on what you need to achieve, and then continually going back to what capability am I actually bringing into the business, and what capability am I bringing into the business, and how is it going to land? So that's then really going into what we would call the experience architecture. So thinking about it from a persona-led perspective. So yes, having change in mind, having adoption in mind all the way through, but having it in mind down at the data-driven persona level. So not the workforce segmentation level, but just right down into, we had the example at BP, for those of you who have worked at BP with me, Cranky Craig was an oil rigger. He was somebody that just didn't really want to be spending any of his non-shift time thinking about anything to do with HR, the business. I've just off shift, right, okay. So just having that level of involvement of a reality of a persona. So we did our design workshops, we had Cranky Craig on a little stick, we'd be going, Cranky Craig wouldn't be able to do that. So just really bringing to life the personas as you're actually going through the global design, the local design, the validation workshops really works. And then having that continually in mind as you're going through test, deployment, and revisiting it with those personas once you're live. So that, again, never-ending cycle.
Nice. I'm just going to call up on screen a couple of the questions. And Sian, you talked about this earlier, but I'm going to go to Louise just to get any sort of thoughts from her perspective. And it's that question number 3 that I think is really interesting. And there'll be plenty of people that are in the chat, that are attending, and maybe they want to be in the chat, but who might be quite interested in this, because this has been a focus of a lot of our previous webinars, that focus on how do you actually deliver ROI? What's kind of the key to unlocking that ROI when you've made that investment? So just, Louise, any kind of thoughts or musings on that before we then move to Andrew?
So I guess the one thing that springs to mind is kind of before you even get into the kind of business case of any kind of return on investment and what that looks like is actually understanding what exists today. Because one problem that kind of I've faced before is that we have been trying to kind of deploy a system, often with manager self-service, to populations of retail or to distribution centers or any kind of supply chain roles. And what you find is, due to the kind of demographic of those people, they don't have mobile phones or they don't utilize email, and we as a business haven't had them already set up in the kind of AD or whatever kind of email address situation you need. So if you don't know that stuff and haven't considered it, before you even get to the point of you deploying a technology, you've already got a problem that you need to fix. And if someone else isn't already on that, like your technology colleagues or anyone else, then it becomes your problem. So I think it's making sure that before you even think about like what your specific task at hand is thinking about anything else that may happen in the business more widely that may or may not have an impact on you. Because I think you just won't get the return of investment otherwise. I think the other thing then, I guess, is building on from Sian's point, is kind of you really need to make sure that those, Cranky Craigs, or, we've had kind of, Julie in, onto online 6 or whatever it might be, where they just don't kind of, they have no intention, even, if you can overcome those problems I mentioned, you then get through all of the, design and the pieces that Sian mentioned, you then go live and they just go, I'm just not doing it. So with all the best will in the world, you need to get those on side. And of course, you don't know when you go into that, right? And it's amazing how noisy that one person can be. Like, the fact Cranky Craig has got a reputation on this webinar is an example of how powerful these people can be, right? So, and similarly with Julie, she was a force to be reckoned with, So you always want to kind of make sure that if you can pick out some of those, live behaviors that you need to go and battle and actually get them involved right at the outset, because I think only then will you get that return of investment.
Yeah, and Andrew, just to build on that, you're not a Cranky Craig, are you, Andrew? You don't look like a Cranky Craig.
Not today. Only on Fridays.
So from your perspective and that kind of unlocking ROI, just want to build on that, and then we can move on to the next question.
Look, for me on ROI, I think it's really careful not to get caught in the trap of just thinking about this as financial benefits. The amount of times that I've started a project with a big commitment around headcount, and then that becomes the sole focus of what you do. If you're setting out and your target is just to purely drive efficiency, it will start to skew the way that you look at the program. So for me, as you're looking at delivering the value from whatever piece of technology you're delivering, try and look beyond just the headcount efficiency. For me, it's about looking how easy are you making it for people to actually deliver self-service? How easy are you making it for the function, particularly in the frontline HR space, to get them away from some of the day-to-day admin so that they can do other stuff? Okay, so for me, the big learning is don't just jump to focusing on cost as an ROI. There are other elements in there that can be explored.
Yeah, exactly. It's a bit deeper than those sort of surface value remarks, isn't it? Okay, right. I'll move us on to the next question, which is question number 4 that we've got, which is, in what direction is HR heading and what role does HR technology play? So obviously now we're looking at the forward-thinking side. It's where is HR heading? And Sian, I've got a feeling that you want to kick us off on that one. So have you got any thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think there's a few things just to kick us off. If we think about, I would think about the focus in terms of buzzwords. So what are the sorts of things that people just increasingly are talking about? And if you're not talking about them, then you're behind the times. So of course, if we think about the talent agenda, then there's a talent attraction aspect, but also there's a skills agenda. So let me just touch on those 2 points and then others can pitch in. So if you think about the talent attraction piece, still a huge priority for most all companies in some way, shape or form, whether it's internal, whether it's external talent attraction. And if we think about the opportunities, just starting to bridge into how is AI useful, talent attraction is one of those really interesting spaces, because if you think about the use cases and those personas, workforce segments that are actually going to benefit from something that will improve their world. You think about the manager, the hiring manager, firstly, you've got AI that will help them write better requirements, tick. That means our requirements are clearer right up front. Then if you think about it from a candidate experience perspective, actually, I'm going to get a more personalized experience because some of the resume sifting will be done. Firstly, it'll be done quicker and I'm going to get a better experience. And then secondly, I'm going to get a more personalized approach. And then if I'm actually working in HR and I'm doing some of the actual administrative work and the necessary work behind the scenes, then from a pure efficiency perspective, I'm going to see that I can add more value because some of the work will be done for me. And also the suitability of clients that's coming through. So tick, oh, actually, I'm delivering for the business. So there's a piece around the talent attraction piece that has so much potential. And if we then just took that into the world of skills, of course, if we think about skills and what we've been focused on in the past, we've under-indexed on skills hugely. We've over-indexed on credentials, really, I suppose you'd call it. So if we think about how some of the AI technology that has been in our vendors for a while, if you think about the top vendors out there, but how explicitly it's being used, and you think about some of the needs that you have as soon as you shift your business operating model into that skills focus, you're starting to think about, right, okay, workforce planning, brilliant, nice AI application there. So you start to think about the internal marketplace, the internal talent marketplace, and that's really, it's a matching. That's what it's doing. And so if you know what skills are needed and what skills you have, you can think about that efficiency aspect of being able to match that, but also then it starts to then benefit from I don't have a match. What are the needs, the development needs of those folks so that I am actually developing my talent internally? And of course, that's what a lot of the vendors are actually spending their money on. So a lot of the R&D recently has gone into how can we make that world far more efficient, effective, and more automated. So we can see some real benefits coming from some real business use cases. So it's important to always obviously link the two together.
Yeah, certainly. Sian, I'm just going to stick with you just for a second, and then I'll get Andrew just to build on that. Because when we were talking previously, you've talked about this, and we've talked about AI, the impact of AI. I think it's really important to distinguish the differences between AI. As you just mentioned, a lot of the big tier 1 vendors, they've already been doing AI. They've already been embedding it into the system for quite a long time. But AI is quite a fad word. It's been a fad word for at least the last, just coming up to a year now, since the introduction and mainstream development of ChatGPT, Bard. Of course, it's making that distinction between those are generative AIs as opposed to just AI, which is what the others have been doing. But one of the things that you said previously, which I want you to just touch on for a minute, and then Andrew, if it's all right, I'll go to you, and then Louise, is this idea of human loop skills. And I thought that was a really fascinating discussion, actually, because it's the fear of AI taking roles, but actually the impact that humans will play in that whole sort of process. So can you just broaden on for the guys the human loop skills on that? And then Andrew, if I could just get your thoughts on that as well.
It's an interesting one because there is the scare factor out there, isn't there? There's the aspect of, you hear the statistics, 80% of roles will be impacted. And of course, when you hear the word impact, people take that differently. So impact can be positive and can obviously be negative. So if we think about what will still be required, there will still be a need to have humans in the loop. So hence the recognition of the human loop. And the sorts of things that obviously are going to need to be done are all the prompting, there'll be the analysis, there'll be the actual turning information data into storytelling. There'll be the whole validation of anything that comes out and putting a real view on it. There'll be the whole using information and storytelling will be huge. There'll still be prioritization, there'll still be governance we need to put around all of these things. So the human aspect of this is huge still. There will be new roles. There'll be roles like data engineers, architects, scientists. They will be huge. Let's not underplay the fact that those sorts of skills will be needed hugely. But let's not underplay also the fact that storytelling has been a need for years and years. So it's a development of that, and it's a different use of the storytelling skill. But also, even when we were doing some of the basic sort of chat, putting chat tools in many years ago, we still had really funky role titles like conversational analyst. I love that term. So I want to be a conversational analyst. We've got prompt engineers in the future. There are roles that will come out that will be very new to the application of AI, but the fundamental that we need to just really keep hold of is, firstly, we're on a long journey, but secondly, there are humans in the loop. There is a human loop aspect to all of this, and we shouldn't forget that. And HR is obviously part of that, and we need to recognise the importance of that.
Yeah, definitely. Andrew, just if you want to build on that for me, if you've got any thoughts around that, I'm sure you've got plenty of thoughts around the whole AI world.
As always, I'm glad you distinguish between the different types of AI. So when it comes to virtual assistants, they're only going to get more intelligent and start to have an impact on tier 0, maybe tier 1. Maybe I'm a skeptic, and I don't believe that until we've cracked what standard process looks like, that you can really drive the full AI from a lot of what we do across the life cycles. Maybe another interesting view is I'm seeing increasingly with a lot of the talent tools, whether it be in talent acquisition or in talent management, there's this expectation that you're just going to give this to managers and the line. And that's actually quite dangerous, because it's not there to replace their opinion. It's there to augment human decision making, not replace it. So I think that one of the important things for me when you're looking at how you're going to leverage AI is how are you going to explain this to people within HR, but also the business, that it's, if you get a recommendation on candidate fit, it doesn't mean that you disregard it. It's there to help inform the decision. So I think that education piece, again, around how AI should be used with the line and HR is key.
Lovely. And Louise, just to finalise us off on this, the AI journey that we've been on in the last sort of 5 months.
So I guess from my perspective, and building on kind of what Andrew said, I think, AI really uses the data that already exists, right? It doesn't make up new information. It will based on only what it knows. So I think for me, the kind of human element comes around building on that, right? So it will give you, to the point Andrew and Charmaine, it will give you an answer, but that answer will be, perhaps a 50% version of where you want to get to. And I think it also kind of doesn't have the ability of emotional intelligence. I appreciate we're talking now rather than the future, but the emotional intelligence piece, the creativity piece. So I think research that was shared this week with us as a population was kind of alluding to the fact that effectively AI can bring up a new person to the level of a good existing person, but it can't do the next bit. So it can't then make someone from kind of a good level to exceptional. Neither can it kind of give you the creativity that is often needed in some of these problems. So AI will get you to a point, but then actually when you need that kind of innovation, that creativity, the line is kind of drawn. So it's about us kind of, I guess, figuring out if we go back to kind of the skills gap piece, what kind of personas, background, experience. It's not kind of certifications. It is kind of how can someone apply judgment and understand, like, this is 50%, but what is that extra 50% that is needed?
Yeah, I think that's really important. And certainly from my experience and my workings as a marketeer from an AI perspective, that piece is really important. One of the things that I've learned in the last sort of 6 months with my team is around the importance of being able to put that human spin on these things. It's quite easy to take a piece of information or data, feed it into ChatGPT, and it spits out something. But sometimes I find that it needs the so what that needs to come out the other side, and that's that human loop that Sian talked about as well. Of course, we do have questions which we are getting through as we talk, and to my lovely panelists. If you do have any questions, we are willing to answer them. So please pop them in the chat. There's a question and answer section. If those of you guys, whilst I was giving you instructions on how to do that. I'm sure most of you have done that before. It's Zoom. We've all been doing Zoom for about 3 years now, haven't we? But so we've gone through today a lot of the questions that we've had so far. I just wanted to touch on, we've touched on the AI piece just now, and we've sort of touched on that. Is tech the answer? When we went through the first sort of set of questions, but Louise, I'm going to start off with you this time because I want to make Sian go last, because I think it will get her a bit irate, and that's amusing to me. But can I just get you to build us some just thoughts in terms of this idea of technology being the answer for future challenges that are being faced? Because I think there's always a danger, isn't it, that people see that as the panacea, but it's not always the case, isn't it? Certainly, I guess from your perspective and background, if you can give us some thoughts, that'd be grand.
Yeah, of course. I think, there's no two ways about it. I think technology goes a good way to add in a lot of value around our function as a whole. But I think it might be unfair to say, and obviously I don't know all of the participants that are on the webinar. Apologies, I've not got the list in front of me, but very infrequently are organizations at the kind of forefront of all technology in our space. So I think, it's all very well for us to kind of talk about the role of technology, but often many businesses just aren't there yet. So I think, it's about kind of having behavior sets that are kind of inquisitive and intriguing, and need to kind of go away and do the analysis of kind of, what can technology add to what value can technology add here, but actually what problems are we going after? And then kind of only once you know that answer can you then decide whether technology is going to be the solution or not. Because I think, often there's a combination of kind of technology and, having the right people in the roles, or, having the right kind of, even, if you take it then outside of HR, making sure that you've got the right organizational structure overall to make sure you can deliver as a business. So technology will go some way to do that, but it won't in any way go the full way.
Yeah, Andrew, just some thoughts from you on that perspective.
Completely agree. Technology is the enabler. If as an HR leadership team, your conversations are being dominated by technology, something is wrong. Technology is the enabler to so many of the challenges people are facing in terms of identification or lack of talent, driving better decision makings from managers or business partners. But it's the enabler. It is not the sole solution, in my opinion.
Yeah, Sian?
I was just jotting down some notes, and funnily enough, same points. So I think there is a reflection on, for those of you who have or are just about to deploy something, there is a reflection on the release, optimize, innovate. So just the continual never-ending cycle of just making sure that as you deploy, then you're always looking at what should I have done, and always improving and innovating. So I think that is one theme. Then exactly to Louise and Andrew's points, we've just got to be clear on what the business outcomes and capabilities are that we're actually looking to enable or deploy, versus technology, shiny nice thing, what do we need it for? So absolutely, it needs to be business outcomes focused. Any decision making we make on any futures. Technology, of course, is only an enabler. And then I just think it is worth us reflecting on AI does have a role in the future. To Louise and Andrew's very well made points, of course, we need to be careful about what the use cases are. and we need to be very careful about understanding what role it has and the future skills that are needed to really leverage it to its best ability. So we know that anything around AI is going to have a significant change wrapper around it. If we think about some of the cognitive bias that still comes with the evaluation and the analysis of what it actually spits out, if we think about some of the curiosity skills, Louise, that you mentioned, some of the data skills that we need to wrap around AI to make it work from an enabling and using what comes out of it. It is a future, but it is one part of a future rather than the future, and we just need to be careful about over-promising and going back to the basics of what do we need it for.
Yeah, certainly. I've got a question that I wouldn't mind posing to you guys. I guess it's around managing expectations, and it's linked to this idea of tech being the answer. I want, if it's all right, I'll start with you, Andrew, just to reflect for me on the importance of managing those expectations, because I'd imagine you've been in plenty of scenarios where people think, do you know what, we've got a problem, this is the solution, it's technology that's going to enable us. How can you just give me any thoughts of your experiences about any challenges around managing expectations of different stakeholders? Because it's all very well, you know, the C-suite perhaps saying, we think this is going to work, make it so. Just give me some reflections on that idea of how important it is to manage expectations of not just the C, it's the business as well, isn't it?
It's a paradox, Chris, because it's really challenging, because if we face it, most of the technology products that we're talking about are really expensive. And so you're going into C-suite conversations to try and persuade someone to sign millions and millions of pounds or dollars off to invest in this technology. And then at the same time, you're trying to downplay it. You're trying to say, this isn't going to be life-changing. And actually, in order for this technology to work, I need the operating model in place. I need the vision. I need the role of the manager to be confirmed. So you do find yourself playing different personas as you go through this conversation. But I think my experience has been to underplay it. So where I'm trying to get to with technology delivery I do now is that you should almost not notice it. So you should almost be able to get to the point where you are able to change the tech and have it work. I'm hoping, because we've come a long way in HR tech now, that when you actually find it and get to it, that it works. But I think if you make too much of a song and dance about this, particularly for business users who are probably going to use these products maybe once, twice a month, 3 times if you're lucky, you've got to be really careful about overselling this. Really careful.
Yeah, that's a really, really interesting point. Apologies for all of you guys that are not football fans, but I love that description. It's almost good if it's working best if you don't notice it. And that's one of the cliches of football, is the best kind of referees are the ones that you don't actually notice, which I find is ironic, given in the last week that there's been lots of controversy around VAR, particularly with a certain Tottenham versus Liverpool game that happened. But I'm digressing, so I'm going to move on. I actually want to bring Louise and Sian in on this. So Louise, your kind of experiences of having to manage those expectations of different stakeholders within the businesses that you've worked in.
Yeah, so I think for me, the important part is selling what's going to impact them and their teams. So, you know, if you can speak to finance and understand why, you know, the numbers that finance are getting versus the numbers that HR are getting, you know, age-old problems that still exist day after day in all of our organizations. I think if you can then go and get kind of on the side of the CFO, similarly, you know, if you can go and get on the side of kind of the, you know, supply chain directors that, for example, may want to go, well, I want to know how much the cost per unit is, you know, and how much time it's taking. If you've got, you know, time and people data, then that will tell them a story, right? And that will mean that they can showcase their delivery, which, let's face it, you know, you do come up against egos, and you come up against product, you know, kind of business need, and you know, everyone wants to deliver at the end of the day, right? No one really comes to work to go, oh, I really want to do a bad job today. So I think you have to get on the kind of you have to play to your, you know, whichever C-suite stakeholder it is, or whether that's their leadership team, because they are the ones that will influence kind of whether that lands. And also whether you get the initial, you know, to Andrew's point, whether you get that initial sign off of the initial investment. So
Yeah, certainly. And Sian, you are no stranger to having to manage expectations of various stakeholders. So any kind of bits of advice for our webinar attendees today?
I think, and some would say, you would say this, Sian. So I think it's about recognizing the value versus some of the more traditional approaches to establishing a business case. It's about what value are you delivering to who? And it's exactly what Andrew and Louise are saying. So it's the what's in it for me from a persona level. And if you're getting down to that sort of nitty gritty, then it's very easy to roll that back up again and say, right, okay, CIO, CFO, CHRO, CPO, these are the benefits in your space. And then, of course, there's an integrated whole, because as Andrew says, these are big numbers and we shouldn't actually dwell on our laurels thinking that these are things that are automatically going to go through. They don't. It's hard work for everyone involved. So it's about specificity of value, and it's about making sure that the integrated whole makes sense for the business. And I know I said it right up front, but what we see happen is a lot of cases don't actually recognize that at this later stage of making technology investments, a lot of companies are holding a fair amount of risk, whether that's data, compliance, risk, GDPR risk. We just shouldn't underplay that that is something that has built over time, because some companies haven't already moved to the cloud. So all of those aspects of value, whatever that value means to a certain company, we've just got to work it through and think about the outcome, the value, and what's in it for me.
And
Nice.
Chris, if I can just jump back in on Sian's point, I think there's almost a point where sometimes we're a bit embarrassed as HR professionals to admit that the tech that we have is outdated and it needs to be replaced. In many cases, you're not talking about the bolt-ons, you're talking about the fundamentals you need to run an HR function, whether it be your core, whether it be your ATS, you have to have these. And organizations that are sitting on infrastructure, which to Sian's point, from a compliance perspective, is putting you at risk. The temptation is always to go and sell, this is the new LinkedIn or it's the Google, when actually the compliance foundation bit is often the real narrative and story. And I think my learning has been, actually, if you focus on, if I get this wrong, I pay people incorrectly. If I get this wrong, I can't recruit people. By starting there in conversations with CFO and CHROs, it suddenly becomes very clear to them, as opposed to, look, you're going to get this great AI talent view of my work, wonderful. But if you tell a CFO you're not going to pay people, it's a very different dynamic.
Yeah, definitely. It's about stressing that urgency.
Well, exactly. Yeah, fines from the HMRC are also another good. I was just going to say, fines from the HMRC are another good thing to get in there, because that often makes people shift, which only helps us deliver these wonderful solutions.
Yeah, exactly. We're just coming towards the end of the webinar. That's really flown by today. I've got a slide that I'm going to show in a second, because we're running an event in about a month's time, which is an in-person event. It's the culmination of what we're putting together. But just before I do that, I'll start with you, Louise, this time. Just if you can give us any sort of, if there's one thing that you can take away from today's webinar, one bit of advice, one sort of nugget that you'd say, if you only do one thing, do this. What would that be? What's the kind of, because we've talked a lot today around the role of AI, we've talked around making the most of the investments that you've got, about how it's not just the technology, you have to think broader than that. It's not the panacea, as we've talked about. But is there any sort of nugget that you would say, if you only do one thing, do this?
I think it probably does go back to the thing we've mentioned a couple of times, which is kind of really know your business. So know your personas, know the people that this is ultimately going to land with, because to Andrew's point, they may only be using it 3 times a month or whatever. It's those people that it needs to work for. Ultimately, that's kind of what we're trying to get to. And that all then feeds back to go, well, if people don't engage with whatever the activity is, then you won't get effectively the data at the other end, which is which is what we all need to then meet our compliance risks or meet our KPIs or whatever kind of business strategy data points we need. So I think it's about really understanding who the landscape of the employee group, the demographics, who this solution is ultimately going to impact, because that then builds on every step of that process. So it impacts the change, the design. I'm doing it all in the wrong order, but effectively that whole end-to-end process. it needs to be considered from, Julie and Cranky Craig and all of the other people that you need to consider. So
lovely. And don't forget about Cranky Craig. I think that will be Sian's bit, but I'm going to start with you, Sian, then. Is it that you can't forget about Cranky Craig?
But this is how powerful what Louise has just said. Like, genuinely, we had another one, but I can't repeat that because it's a little ruder. But if you have those personas in mind, then absolutely it drives you, because you're thinking about the whole persona base versus the normality piece. So yeah, but I suppose my one, just to build on that, really is the value aspect. It's always going to be define your value right up front, continue measure, continue track, and just realize that you're in that never-ending cycle of release, optimize, and innovate.
Release, optimize, and innovate. As if we don't have enough acronyms in HR, we've just given you another one. Just to
blatantly stolen from somebody else, by the way. This isn't something I've come up with. I just loved it.
And Andrew, just to round us off then today, what's that one nugget that you want our listeners to, or our watchers to take away from today?
Think beyond and look beyond the technology. Focus on value and why you're doing it. And lastly, if you need to replace your technology, don't be afraid to tell a story which is particularly mundane and boring. That I need to pay people and I need to recruit people. It will resonate.
Nice, I love it. Now, I mentioned a couple of minutes ago that we have got an event that we are running in about a month's time. It'll be November the 8th. I'll just advance the slides if they actually want to advance. This is what happens when you get animations. Nightmare. I've just got a QR code that I'm leaving up on screen just for a minute or two, because if you've enjoyed some of the conversations that we've had today, we'd love to see you at an event that we're running on November the 8th. It'll be here in London at Sea Containers House. We've got a wonderful venue. There'll be some nibbles and a few drinks. But the purpose of this is, as we've sort of talked about, and I talked about right at the beginning of the webinar today, it's about the culmination of all of the different elements that we've talked about across our 4 webinars. Now, if you want to watch back, you can see on-demand versions of the webinars, which are on our website. You go to lacepartners.co.uk/insights. There's also some content that we've written summarizing a lot of the pieces as well, which hopefully you can find useful as well. It's been fantastic running this series over the summer. If you have listened to all of the previous webinars, then obviously I'm a less familiar face, because the fabulous Mr. Chris Horton, unfortunately, he's not well today. He's a bit poorly, but I've been drafted in as a last-minute ringer. But if you'd like to join us, I'm sure Chris will be there. He will be joining us at the panel event. He'll be comparing. We've got some fantastic guests, and we'll share with everybody that's attended today some of the findings, and there's also be a video available from this recording today as well. That's it from us. That's it from me. Thank you very much for all of you guys for joining us. Andrew, it's been splendid to have you on. Good to see you again, sir.
Thank you very much.
And Louise, thank you for your time today, being brought in as a newbie to LACE, but still with that client side view. So that was really, really handy and useful. And thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me.
And last but not least, because she always has to take centre of attention, it's Sian Beecham. Sian, thank you very much for joining us today.
The real Slim Shady.
The real Slim Shady. Thank you very much to everyone else that's been in the chat. We've enjoyed talking to you all today, and hopefully you'll join us next time when we run one of these webinars. But from myself and the team, see you later.
Thanks, Chris.